Well, for more on this story, we do get to speak to our reporter Njanji Chauke, who is, of course, with two guests, particularly Dr. Kwasim Borat of the Gift of the Givers and the orthopedic specialist, Dr. Korchi there. Njanji, good evening to you. And before you chat to your guests, just give us a sense of the scale of the disaster. I mean, when I was last in Indonesia, I was on the pristine beaches of Bali. You're quite far from that idyllic life. And why have the officials decided to call off the rescue effort at this time?
The government of Indonesia is concerned about the spread of disease. As you know that from tomorrow on Thursday, it will be 14 days or 2 weeks since the twin disaster struck. So there is a major concern on part of the government in terms of the spread of disease. As you know that the figure, the death toll has risen to just over 5,000, over 2,000, but there are 5,000 other people that have been reported missing. And as a result, it looks like those people might have perished as well. We visited 3 of the areas that were hardest hit by this disaster on the 28th of September, and what we saw there was quite unbelievable. We saw sunken buildings, mangled wrecks, cars that were hanging on trees. There were also lots of belongings. You could see that it was quite chaotic when the earthquake struck and the ensuing tsunami. So tomorrow the government has issued an order to say that all urban search, rescue and recovery operations have to come to a stop so as to avoid a spread of disease. For now, it looks like those sites will be turned into mass graves or national monuments. There's still consultation with all the families of the deceased people, Bongani.
Njanji, of course, we also know that for many of the affected areas, locals were in short supply of food, medicines, and there was some looting at a stage, with even instructions for the military to shoot on sight anybody who was involved in that kind of activity. Have things settled at least?
We have not witnessed any incident of that nature. On arrival here a few days ago, it was very calm. Obviously, people mourning their loved ones, most of them still very much traumatized, you know, battling to move on with their lives, you know, as they continue to nurse those injuries. Many of the people still remain in those makeshift hospitals and clinics, whilst thousands of people that have been displaced by this disaster are being accommodated at the many camps that are all over this island city of Palu. But to talk more about the distribution of aid, I'm being joined by 2 guests here. The first one being Dr. Kwasim Borat of Gift of the Givers. Can you just tell me about the role of Gift of the Givers in this particular disaster? We know that Gift of the Givers this year was marking 26 years of doing global humanitarian work. What have you done so far, particularly today? What was your focus?
Thanks, Njanji. I think the focus for us has been a threefold attack in terms of addressing the needs of this massive disaster. The first is humanitarian aid, which, as we've seen on our visits to the affected areas, is in critical need. The second is medical teams providing medical relief and care to patients affected by the disaster. And the third is urban search and rescue. We'll talk more about that later. But the first, in terms of the humanitarian aid, there's a dire shortage of clean drinking water. You mentioned the possibility of spread of diseases, and that is a critical limiting factor in terms of preventing diseases. So today we had sourced locally food packs for families affected by this disaster who were in internally displaced camps, and we had to source that from a town called Mamuju A truck takes 24 hours to drive to reach us at this destination. So we had pre-planned it. It arrived today, and we distributed it. In total, we distributed 12,000 boxes of noodles, which are easy to cook and prepare. In addition, we had 7,500 kilograms of rice, which is a staple diet here, and 3,200 liters of water. So that's the aid that we've procured and distributed today to approximately 300 families. So even though the volumes sound like a lot, we've managed to assist 300 families today. We're trying to repeat the exact process tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose this disaster is going to come up at the upcoming climate change conference in Poland, because Indonesia is not the first time that it's been struck by disaster of this magnitude. We saw this happening again in 2004, Banda Aceh and Sumatra, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed. If you look at that area, we know that there is a process, a scientific process called soil liquefaction, where the sandy soil caves in due to the pressure created by the earthquake. Going forward, how do you think we should sort of accommodate our communities or build the so-called resilient communities?
I think you raise a valuable point in terms of, rather than being reactive, we need to be proactive, both in terms of settlement, in terms of human settlement, in terms of areas that are high risk, as well as in terms of our response to disasters. And I think liquefaction is a phenomenon that we learned about on this mission, in that we didn't really explore it prior to this. But obviously that needs to be looked at in terms of where people live. The Pacific Ring of Fire, as we know, as you've mentioned, is prone to these type of disasters, so we should anticipate this. In terms of a response from ourselves and other organizations in terms of urban search and rescue and humanitarian aid, there needs to be a process in place that allows for early communication of information, early requests for assistance, whereby we as South African Urban Search and Rescue can reach an area like this and be facilitated to get involved in the response, rather than have delays upon delays which then affect our ability to maximize our input into this response.
Let me now turn over to Dr. Kochi, the orthopedic surgeon. You've been out there to the camps, you've seen a number of patients. Earlier today I saw you sort of building a frame. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, when Njanji, you know, in this kind of disasters, so the trauma, I will say, as mainly fractures, tendon injuries, but also wounds, right? And there's a lot of patients have either fractured their extremities or ruptured tendons and ligaments. The patient you mentioned today was a lady who fell during the earthquake, and she injured her medial collateral ligament in her knee. So it means actually that the knee is quite unstable sideways. That will make her very hard for her to walk. Usually in the Western world we'll treat it with a brace, but unfortunately we wasn't able to get a brace in here. So it would be important to make one for her if we want her knee to function. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And then tomorrow, what is the plan of action?
Well, tomorrow, as I made the brace for her, so I'm going to she's going to come to the clinic, and I'm going to try to custom fit it to her size, and then see how it will fit her. And the plan is that she's going to wear that brace for at least 6 weeks. And tomorrow also I'm going to see other patient, because I have some complicated wounds, infected wounds, that I have to assist tomorrow, and then also make plans for how we're going to deal with the wound after our departure.
Okay. Bongani, before I hand back over to you, may I just also mention that it was a group of 27 people, most of them South Africans, but we also had people from Denmark as well as New York who joined this mission. They might not
have been given the chance to go and do search and rescue, but for them this was a very successful mission. So for tomorrow they will be wrapping up the mission, and then on Friday morning we'll be heading out to the capital, Jakarta, before we head back to South Africa. It's back to you in Johannesburg, Bongani.
All right, thank you very much, Njanji Chauke, there in Indonesia. As I said a little earlier, it's a little after 2 o'clock his time. And of course, as you can see, the camp still very much in operation as they start wrapping things up. It's been quite an extraordinary effort and a lot of recognition being given to particularly the gift of the givers. Of course, as you may know, they're often involved in all kinds of rescue missions when disasters pop up around the world. A proudly South African effort there, being coordinated by the gift of the givers. But as you heard, many volunteers from many countries participating in that.